Because what am I fighting for? I mean, what am I fighting for if not balance? I don't want a world that's all good, and I don't want a world that's all bad. I don't want a world that's all masculine. I don't want a world that's all feminine. I want balance. That's what I want. I want to allow this thing to really flourish.
Welcome to the Deja Blu Podcast, where we believe that living a life of magic can be the default. Join us each week as we playfully and authentically dive into the mysteries of life and explore what it truly means to be human. From spirituality, wellness, and all things taboo, we don't hold anything back. So without further ado, let's let the magic unfold. Hello, you beautiful humans, and welcome back to another episode of the Deja Blu Podcast. I was having a moment this morning when I was preparing for today's podcast because I was reflecting on the first time that this majestic human was a guest on my podcast. I remember feeling this imposter syndrome and the audacity for you to even ask him to be on a guest. Who do you think you are? Back in the day when I think it was at the end of season 1. And the best way to describe it was like this little tiny kitten. I hadn't quite realized that she was a lioness yet. And I felt intimidated and fearful and also really excited. And since that point, myself and Aubrey have gone on a journey, real, like the realest it gets. No masks, full heart on the altar, breaking down any construct of the ego, being witnessed in the vulnerability and the crunchy, being witnessed in the celebration, the ecstasy and the highs, and all at the same time. I'm having the blessing of being able to just witness this man weave in the most intimate way as a dear friend, as one of my closest friends and brothers and guides in this life. And also one of the rare humans that can really, really meet me in the depths. And I'm talking like 4 planets in Scorpio diving to the depth of all of creation. Persephone fully dragging me into the underworld. And I'm like, there's no light down here. But then I feel Aubrey's hand on my shoulder. He's like, I miss this. I think I know the way. And so it has just been, honestly, the most heart-activating, mind-illuminating, and earth-shattering relationship for me to be able to navigate weaving alongside this incredible, majestic human. So that's just on my personal experience of what we've weaved through since our first podcast together. But then on top of that, Aubrey is a best-selling author. He is also a podcast host of the Aubrey Marcus podcast, which has been an incredible inspiration for me in interviewing brilliant minds from all over the world and going into the depth of different philosophies and ways of perceiving reality. And also he is a motivational speaker, guide, the founder of On It and Fit for Service, and all of the different expressions that this man continues to weave into the world. But first and foremost, I wanted to sort of start with the impact that you've made on my heart. Mm-hmm. So it is such a gift, and I'm so grateful to welcome you to the Queendom and welcome you to my new podcast, Aubrey Marcus! Yay!
Well, all the love and admiration and gratitude is mutual, sis. It's been so beautiful to have and really understand what a sister really means, in a way. And I've had my own family sisters, but there's a sense of being the big brother, and the big brother is certainly an aspect of our relationship. At certain times I do show up as the big brother, but then there's also like the sister equal, and like understanding what that is all about. Mm-hmm. It's been a big part of my journey in the last few years, especially with, queen as equal in Vylana and then sisters as equals in this other way. And it's just beautiful to have this kind of tribe that is multifaceted, and from my brothers and my sisters and mentors and uncles and the whole family constellation that it develops and then helps really bring forth the best of me, and be able to contribute the best of myself. Mm-hmm. So it feels really good. It feels like this is a new organizational structure that's emergent that is absolutely necessary for where we're going, is we have to have these solid bounds in community.
This is a great place to start. I do want to go into the connection that's been cultivated between the two of us, but also just how it creates a blueprint for the way that we weave in community, in the sense of the strength of our friendship, the strength of what we've created together has been also founded in the crunchy moments. It's been founded in the, what the fuck is happening? I have a clearing with you, or this came up, and then being witnessed in those moments, which actually has created the cement and the foundation of the granite solidity that is the foundation of our connection now. So I would love just to hear your perspective a little bit about the dark side of the moon around forging genuine tribe, and when we can actually move through those crunchy emotions, what is found on the other side of actually showing up to the altar of the discomfort?
The ante for that is the willingness to continue to go into the depth until everything is actually illuminated. That's possible to illuminate. That's the ante for this type of relationship. You have to be willing to go in there, because if you're going to look away and you don't want to actually go in, then there'll be broken glass shards that will continue to cut and continue to, when you step on them, it'll continue to create pain. And those glass shards then become a glass monster that becomes something that ultimately creates a wedge and eats the love that's available between you. So it's a commitment to continue to go in until everything is illuminated and explored, with just radical commitment to being honest and being vulnerable and taking ownership and responsibility for anything that's there, and keep going, so that when you do have a clearing, there's not remnants that remain that then accumulate, and then the remnants that accumulate then create the ultimate divide, because resentments grow from those remnants. So to me, that's the key thing, is just you keep going until there's nothing left. And
that has been a really interesting thing for me to witness between our friendship, is that when there are no shards between us, when there is no unspoken words, we're vibing. We don't even actually need to say anything to each other. We're like picking up telepathically. We're having conversation. It's one look. We check in. We're good. Like, we're weaving. It's almost like what Parker would say is warrior hearts beat as one. Like, that really is the essence of what I feel when I'm on the same page as you. The second that there is anything unspoken that hasn't been fully cleared, all of a sudden it's like, hey, Obs. Oh, yeah, hey, Blue.
Yeah.
How you doing? Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, how are you? Okay, yeah, cool. That was awkward. It's
sure.
Actually recognizing that the formation of a very genuine, deep relationship is founded in the ability and the willingness to show up to the altar, heart out like Hanuman, pulsing in a hand and going, oh, I'm going to just show you this part of myself. And in our ability to actually articulate and communicate around it with the tools of taking ownership of what it is that we're actually feeling, with a compassion and a genuine empathy to want to actually understand the other person's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and the only reason we found ourselves in those particular positions is we'll be in a group setting where some event will be happening and we'll both know it, and it's like, now just fucking isn't the time. It's my homie's birthday, or it's this situation that's going on, and there's a lot of other needs that are there. But yeah, I think for both of us who are very sensitive and attuned to the non-physical dimensions and connections that extend beyond this 3D reality, we can feel it as it's there, and it's this kind of constant noise. It's like the leaf blowers that follow me wherever I go. Like, it's just there, you get this feeling of a buzz of like, man, there's something that needs to be cleared, and I'm grateful for that, right? Because that sensitivity then allows the impetus to kind of go in and just clear it all. It's essential.
So I was almost finding the kink in the clearing conversation too, because also understanding that on the other side of it is an even deeper level of connection and intimacy. So something that I've also noticed the way that you weave through community is that you are the epicenter of fit for service, of also of the community that surrounds you with your closest friends, your nearest and dearest. And the dynamics and the interpersonal dynamics with navigating really large bodies of humans as one of the centerpieces. And then also the clearing conversations and the picking up on all of the unspoken as well. I'm always curious to be your student around the way that you navigate these spaces with so much empathy and grace, while simultaneously not taking on other people's energies or identifying it as your own story. So I'm just curious to understand what's going on in the workings of your mind, of the way that you weave through these spaces without essentially attaching or picking up on other people's projections. I mean, your podcasting alone is being exposed to millions of eyes, and it is.
Yeah.
And so the way that you navigate this from such a deep, sensitive heart has always been something I'm so curious about.
The key is that I know myself. You know, that old adage, know thyself. I spent the last, at minimum, 24 years getting to know myself. That's the start of my plant medicine journey. And before, I would learn a few things here or there, but the interoception, that introspection about who I am as I explore the interior depths of my own cosmos, then that's allowed me to really know myself. And when you really know yourself, you're less likely to take other people's opinions or energy and allow that to actually affect you, because you almost have to agree with somebody to actually allow them to throw you off your center. Some part of you has to be in doubt. Some part of you has to be questioned. And it's not that I'm not open to feedback. Of course I am. But as I know myself more, I can actually feel what someone is saying. And if it's not resonant, it's just not resonant. And it doesn't matter what the pedigree of that human might be. It could be they've been in this lineage for 30 years, in all respect to that particular lineage. But if that teaching doesn't make sense to me, like they want to kick somebody out of the sweat lodge because they're on their moon, and they're telling me that everybody's going to get sick if she's in the lodge on her moon. And I just look and go, I don't think so. I just don't believe that that's true. I think that's a story based in belief, and it doesn't resonate with me. So respect to your lineage. I'm in your lodge. You do what you're going to do. But if this is my kingdom, you know, these rules, these codes, even though they come from deep sources of wisdom, there's still room to evolve them. So I'm not bound by any codes that are not actually self-reified by my own, you know, introspection and knowledge, right? So anybody can tell me something and I'll listen to it, but then I'll try to find the truth of it in my own body. You know, anthro-ontologically, which means in my body, can I feel the realness of it? And if I can't feel the realness of it, it doesn't stick. It doesn't land. So that's really if you're talking about the code of like how I'm able to do that, is I have a deep sense of, all right, I know who I am, and I know the energy that I'm putting in. And then also at the same time, not judging people for having their other opinions or their other ideas, seeing them where they're at and allowing them to be where they are with just a gentle invitation to actually, if you want to join me in this kingdom, in this way I'm thinking, here's the invitation, but feel free to continue and stay in that one. I feel like this one might be more fun. If you want to join me, here's my open hand. We have a blast, you know, and also, you know, access those deep states of reverence and all of the same things. Just, it has to be something that I feel myself. And I think that's been the guide for me to be able to navigate so many different spaces. Is I will, of course, bow to those who are leading a space, or if I'm in a position where somebody else is offering, but nonetheless, I won't actually take it on unless I agree with it.
And I think that solidity is what the community, and I can speak on behalf of, but I can lean into that in you because of the way that you listen to your body and you listen to what actually resonates within the core of your being, as opposed to how it's supposed to look from the outside in. Right. And I'm curious from your journey, because you've been a massive plant medicine ally, ambassador. And also it's the space though where you and I really, really connect in that space, like many spaces, but specifically in the shamanic realms, in the realms of altered states of consciousness, and being met in that space, eye to eye, forehead to forehead, brother to sister, like, oh, we ride on dragons. That space. How would you say that your journey with psychedelics has directly impacted your ability to know yourself in this way that anything that is now not of resonance does not absorb into the core of your being, and therefore you carry it?
Psychedelics are what they really keep me honest, because there's it's interesting. Like, we all want to have our own values and we want to have our own, core ethics and our own morals. And there's not a lot of people, when you rise to a position like myself, where you're CEO and where you're leader, and where this is where a lot of tyrants, lose their way, because they don't have people who have the courage to share something with them, because they're not willing to hear it, right? So always in my positions, besides the plant medicines, I always welcome any voices of dissent and will always listen to them. And I don't necessarily have to agree with them, but I always hear them out. So there was never a point in any of my journeys, even as leader of my company, where I just said, because I said so. If there was a voice of dissent, I would welcome it, and I would just patiently go back and forth until they understood my argument, I understood their argument, and sometimes there was an impasse, and it was like, I fully hear what you're saying, and I think that's a valid hypothesis. And then, but can you hear the reasoning behind my hypothesis and why that's, why I'm actually choosing this path? And then they'll be like, yep, I can understand that. And I'm like, all right, I'm choosing that we're going to go with my hypothesis this time, but I want you to know that you're heard and like deeply appreciated that you shared that. And so that comes up in multiple times. Now, what actually, really holds me accountable though, is when I go into these medicine spaces, any kind of wobble, any area where I haven't been actually acting with full clarity of sight and full clarity of action, the medicines just highlight that. And it's actually kind of brutal. You're looking at it and you're like, oh man, damn it. Damn it. And then you just realize that you pop out of one of those and there'll be an apology or there'll be a clarification or there'll be something that kind of comes up. So they've kept me in check and they've kept me honest, even more so than any other human ever has. It's just, I'm going into that space and the intelligence of these plants and the intelligence that comes from my deep subconscious and that connection that my subconscious has to the source of all that is, that keeps me in bounds. So I don't worry ever about being taken off of my moral, and actually like ethical grounding, because I have tools that just punish me if I do. It's like you can't not look at it anymore. And so that's been one of the reasons why these plants have been such great allies and teachers, is they just illuminate things from a clarity and perspective of truth. And that holds me accountable.
Something that I've noticed the way that you weave in this space, specifically in community dynamics, is that there's no exile. There's no cancel culture that I've witnessed within you, which I deeply, deeply respect. And recognizing if somebody's going through a challenging experience or there is a blind spot, you call them in. You don't cast them out. And so for me, what that says is that there is a deeper relationship with all aspects of yourself that you call in and don't cast out. And the cancel culture really is at large of where we're cancelling ourselves to a certain degree, deeming some sort of emotions or essence of ourselves as unworthy or not acceptable and doesn't have a place here. So what I witness is that your relationship with going into these altered states of consciousness, meeting all aspects of yourself and learning to love those pieces, is directly an effect of the way that you love everybody around you and have such a soft, compassionate heart for all of the emotions, like the really uncomfortable ones, as well as the beautiful and the play and the celebration. And there's a moment when I like rage for me is not something that I experience as an emotion that is easily accessible. I'm more like sad, like I get really sad, but like rage isn't really.
Which in some ways is rage turned inward.
Yeah, it's literally just the folding of I think there's like levels to the emotions, and sadness is just below anger. But there was a moment when I was feeling like, oh, Aubrey, this is coming up in me, and there was a celebration from you. It was like, oh, I love this. Like, let's go. Yeah. And I've witnessed you do that with Vylana too.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what your journey has been to stand in the face of the wrathful goddess and to smile.
Well, it wasn't always like that. I think, so there's two parts of this. One is as Rumi said, and I say this quote all the time, but we're not a drop in the ocean, we're the ocean in a drop. And if you can't identify the full polarity within yourself, you have blind spots. So I see my own badness. And of course, you can transcend the idea of bad or good, but I see my own badness, and it allows me to choose my goodness. because there's nothing out there that I see that I'm like, I can't locate that somewhere inside myself. This is the Hawaiian kahuna wisdom of Ho'oponopono, which isn't just saying, I love you, thank you, forgive me, I'm sorry, which is one of the aspects, but it's much deeper than that. It's actually seeing anything that you see out there and saying, all right, I'm going to find that within myself, and I'm going to say those things to myself as an identification of this is where I located that thing. Even heinous things, locate that within yourself, even if it's, unexpressed and it's not a very big aspect of your polarity, but find it within yourself. So I'm comfortable with my badness. I'm really comfortable with my badness. I'm comfortable with all of those aspects, and I choose to express a different way. But I understand that I have the full potential to go straight Emperor Palpatine Sith, and the full potential to go straight Obi-Wan, right? Like fully all the way. And I land somewhere closer to the Obi-Wan side, but I got a little dark side of the Force in me too. And that's all right. So I can identify the full spectrum, which really helps, because that way when I say Tatuamasi to somebody, like I am that too, I mean it. Like I know, like I mean it. I've seen all of the darkness in the plants, and these crazy journeys have shown me all of that. So when I look from a medicine perspective on somebody who's going through an experience that in a kind of Judeo-Catholic perspective would be, oh, this calls for an exorcism because that's a fucking demon. We need to cast that demon out. To me, what's expressing is an aspect of them that's been in exile, an aspect of them that's been in the shadow that's coming to the surface to express. And whenever I see that come, I just offer some word like, welcome home, welcome to the garden, like you're welcome here. And so in that kind of ceremonial context, it's real easy because there's this kind of ceremonial landscape, ceremonial consciousness, where I understand that anything that's being expressed is an unintegrated part of the self. There is no such thing as a demon possessing you. You are all of the demons, so you're just expressing part of your demonness. That's what's happening. So allow that to express, and then trust that you can choose a different place when that aspect of you is loved and received and accepted. Now, of course, the actions taken from that, well, that's where you have to have boundary, and that's where I'll stand and fight and stop that from being expressed, right? It's not that you allow that to outwardly affect anybody else, but the fact that the act of welcoming that is crucial, I think. So when it comes to the personal relationships, sometimes it can be hard. Sometimes when Vylana gets into, because she has, access to the dark goddess, which has been repressed, a lot of anger that she was never able to express throughout her teenage years in particular. She was grounded for an entire year for listening to the Nappy Roots album. 1 whole year.
What? I didn't know that.
Yeah. 1 whole year she was grounded for listening to the Nappy Roots album. So in that period, can you imagine the anger that she had to repress on a day-to-day basis when all of her friends, she's in high school, all of her friends are going out, and for 1 year she can't meet anybody because she's grounded in her fucking house? So anger, rage, that'll come out. And I ultimately, of course, when it's pointed at me, I'm taking shots. I'm like pulling arrows out of my flesh. Like, damn, this is unjust. This is unfair. And sometimes it can invoke that response. But things really shifted when I started to recognize and put that kind of ceremonial lens on it and be like, all right, Vylana's expressing this aspect of her dark, her dark rage, her dark goddess, and to welcome that. I remember after one of those times, she came to me and she said, it was a long night. She left to go actually do some sound healing for a ceremony, and I was at home, couldn't sleep. She wasn't responding to me. Her phone was off. And so I was just staying up, staying in my own prayer and staying in my own kind of groundedness. And she came back and she's like, I'm so sorry. Like, that was awful. And I just looked at her and I said, no, it wasn't awful. That was awesome. Like, that was awesome. Like, what you did, you completely eviscerated me. You annihilated me in a way that I've never been annihilated before. And that moment was like a huge turning point in our relationship, because she recognized that even that part was lovable too, that there was no part of her that wasn't lovable. And in that moment, everything really shifted. And it's not that she can't catch me slipping sometimes and say something or feel something, and I'll be like, and actually sometimes where there's still some sticky points is the hot rage is actually easier for me to deal with than the cold repressed rage, that kind of removal. So I don't know if it's the best strategy yet. I'm still kind of figuring it out. But some part of me, when I feel that cold, icy wall, where it's like the wall that separated the North from the true North in Game of Thrones, it's like the ice wall.
Right.
I'm like, no. Like, give me the heat. Like, I feel it underneath there. Like, give it to me. And then she'll give me the heat. I'll be like, all right, now we're being honest.
Yeah.
Like, now we're fucking being honest.
The heat melts the wall.
Yeah. Like, now we're being honest. And from this place of honesty, then, like, which is welcome, now we can actually move forward. But it's just become easier and easier in that to really celebrate that anything that's being expressed is a response to the repression, which is with the antidote is expression. This is something that our brother Stephen Jaggers talks about in his somatic breathwork. But repression needs expression to actually liberate itself and to move you into wholeness. So keeping that mindset is something that I think has been really helpful in the journey, especially in the relationship journey.
You've given me that gift as well. Like, I didn't know that there was certain areas or aspects of my own psyche that could be lovable, because I for sure wasn't loving them. And then this is really what I believe that genuine intimate community is that you can run, but you can't hide, right? Like, from these deeper parts of our own psyche that will over time be presented into the space and then be witnessed for them. However, in the past, or my past experiences, is that when these emotions come up, then it's the cold wall, then it's with the withdrawal, which is then just a perpetuation of continuing not to love myself in those places. And so it just builds and builds and builds over time. And so something that I've just noticed within you is that you've had the courage shifted your relationship, found the kink within to stand in the presence of and go, and I love this part too. I welcome it. Actually bring more of this. And we had a conversation recently talking about the difference between recognizing that there's the warmth of the bonfire, which is the pure chi fire that is moving through. And then are we forging it into a spear?
Yeah.
And so that's the differentiation that we want to like actually navigate here. And if you would like to share your 2 cents into the difference between honoring the energetics, still allowing the anger, still allowing the rage, still allowing the jealousy, still allowing whatever it is to be a bonfire. But what is the difference when the shift happens, when it turns into a spear?
Yeah, so you imagine the energy as kind of dissolved in a way and kind of ephemeral and dissolute, just pure energy. Like fire is a good example, just the warmth, not the actual flame, which is kind of a way of like directing that heat into actually something that's like burning. Imagine like a blowtorch or something like that. So that would be one way to look at it, but you can form into a hard point, which is typically a word or typically an idea. And when you form the anger into a point, whether it's a dart or a spear or an arrow or something like that, those become much more difficult to dislodge, because there's little pieces, little parts of the shrapnel that break off, and then it takes much more care, and there's often scars that come from that. But heat, it's just like being in the lodge. It's just like being in the sweat lodge, and you can like actually absorb the heat and then respond, and then you don't have to pick out any other little pieces of broken glass that might be remaining. And it really involves words. Like, words are typically the way that we form points from that anger. And we'll feel the anger, and actually there's a part of the anger that actually does want to lash back out and wants to hurt. You feel scared, you feel wounded, you feel vulnerable, you feel angry, and you want to actually attack in a certain way. And, then guiding, like, all right, like, feel like, let's get the full heat out, but let's not put that into a single word, because that word becomes the piece of broken glass that gets broken off. And then you got to get the tweezers, and then you got to do like a bunch of things, and you'll still remember those words. And so that's kind of a rule that I've made with Vylana, and I've, tried to make with my other partners as well. And it was something that my mother taught me early on, is like, however angry you get, don't ever form that into a word. Allow your anger it's okay to allow your anger to be there, but the words stick. And that's the point where, I really make a differentiation. Like let's have it. Let's feel the full heat of it. But let's never call each other a name. Let's never condense this to a condition or an idea or something else that actually gets sticky and can break off, because then it just takes a little more psychic surgery to deal with. It's not that you can't deal with it, but it might leave a scar.
Yeah, 100%. Something that really stands out really strongly for the softness of your heart is your relationship with your mother, and how, even just when I mention your mother in this space, the way that you light up and have been received the gift of being able to share the same space with her and just witness the love between the two of you and the way that you speak about her. From my read on it, or what I perceive from it, is that the way that she loved you is now living through you in the way that you love others. And the way that she unconditionally accepted you in the fullest spectrum of who you be and your expression in this life, and then witnessing you gift that to other people, is medicine for me as wanting to be a mother in this life, of the way that I choose to actually show up in mothering myself, and be the responsibility as a woman with the Stargate Enterprise between my legs from one dimension to the next, and the responsibility of being a mother, and also the potency of how the legacy lives on when unconditional love is genuinely rooted in. So I would love to hear from your perspective of how your relationship with your mother has played into the way that you love women.
When we're young, our mother and our father are stand-ins for the capital M mother and the capital F father. And we have difficulty disambiguating because we're not actually taught that. It's your mom and it's your dad, and your mom and your dad represent capital M mom and capital D dad, like the mother and the father, like Great Spirit and Gaia, if you want to use those words. I was very lucky in that my mother was actually a great stand-in for the Great Mother, the way that she loved me, right? So even though I've, of course, had to, as we all must at a certain point, say, no, that's my mom, of course, but that's also Kathy. Yeah. And then there's a Great Mother that she's actually representing to some certain degree, but she's human and she has her own faults and failings, as we all do. We're all fallible. So I think as a general idea, you have to disambiguate your parents from actually, the real mother and father, which means you have to understand what the real mother and father are and what those energies are. But she was damn close. And like, to give an example, I think, I've, with On It and my podcast and my best-selling book and all kinds of different things, some of her friends would come up to her and go, Kathy, like, aren't you so proud of your son? And she would just look at him and go, what do you mean? I've always been so proud of my son. Like, always. Like, all of this stuff, it doesn't matter at all. Like, I've been proud of him since he was a little boy, since, I was holding his feet and rolling balls to him between his legs. And, like, it's no different. So that unconditionality, where my accomplishments and my achievements didn't make my mother love me any more or less, has really provided this deep grounding of how I relate to all women. And it's required much less work than, let's say, my relationship to father. My father was brilliant and powerful. And he helped form the way that I think about the world, my mind, my kind of rational mind, my philosophy, like a deep kind of a deep access to fundamental philosophical and psychological principles, and lots of beautiful things in my relationship with my father and my stepfather in different ways. But there was conditionality. When I performed well, there was more felt love. My dad didn't say, like, I don't love you right now, son, because you blew it in that basketball game, but I could feel it. I could feel the difference. And if somebody asked my dad, aren't you proud of your son after this, after a good thing, he'd be like, yes, I am. He did this thing. He got these grades. He was magna cum laude in his, at University of Richmond, so it still mattered. So that's taken more work to actually then disambiguate my father from, Great Spirit, and actually understand the unconditionality of that Yeshua consciousness, which not only forgives everything that you do, but when you actually enter into that space, it's not forgiveness, because there was never even a record of grievance. There was no record of wrong. It's like, forgive you for what? You're already pre-forgiven. Like, what do you mean? What is the thing you're asking me to forgive? I don't understand. Like, that's Father. And when you get that aspect of father, that's a whole different ballgame. But yeah, with my mother, she was so close, and that's just such an unusual blessing that I've had, and really set me up to have a big advantage in that category. And then, of course, there's more work for me on my relationship to the masculine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What you just said about the fact that her pride is not directly related to your level of success or your achievements. And just when you said that, it's breaking down all of the moments where it's like, I want to make my parents proud of me, so I'll choose X, Y, and Z. But by just being me, like, is that really actually working? And the celebration of, when make a large amount of money or get this job, then there's like a big level of celebration and pride. However, just the consistent, just because he is, it's already, I'm proud is like just the default setting. Yep. So anything on top of that is a deep celebration, but it's not going anywhere. And this is really the depth of unconditional love. Mm-hmm. And so then here you are, I'm witnessing you as a friend and showing up in the way that you love Vylana, the way that you love your community, is bring all of it to the altar, because we're here going to stand in the fire of transmutation without forging any spears, but we're going to stand in the fire of transmutation, but let the fire roar and just know that you'll be loved while you stand here.
Yeah, and another part too is, I think people might imagine like, well, where is the line of discretion? Where's the line of boundary? And there's a lot of people that come into the community sphere, and by holding this strong, resonant field, if somebody is not meeting that field, I won't try to drag them into it. If they're not actually able or desirous or willing to meet that kind of field that we've created, if they're not to abide by the laws of love that govern Camelot, let's say, then they're not welcome in Camelot until they actually enter that space. And then, of course, they're welcome back, right? So, and it's not that I'm pushing people out. I'm just holding a frequency, and then I'm just allowing that frequency to be its own force field, to say, like, here's the rules by which we abide, and if you're not able to, it's going to be very uncomfortable. And I'm actually not even going to need to say anything, because you'll feel the energy that there's no invitation there for further intimacy to be shared. And I think that's also important, right? Because you can have this radical, non-judgment, this radical forgiveness, but you also need to have the discretion. You can be the full flower of the rose and still hold your thorns and say, you're not allowed to trample into this space. And so that's also another aspect of it, is to understand that there's a lot of people that'll come in. Sometimes they get in real close, and then they get, pushed out to the side, not because I'm pushing, but because the energy that we've cultivated actually makes it no longer resonant.
There's so much permission breathing through your words right now. I am curious to go into the direction of Eros. This is something that is like very strong in your messaging recently, and it's just the way that you're living your life. And also in another, I've just extracted so much medicine just from even knowing you. However, there was a deeper inquiry for me around, okay, what is Eros? How have I been conditioned around my relationship with Eros? And recognizing from that deeper inquiry, I realized I was drinking Eros through a straw as opposed to bathing in the ocean. And so I would love to hear your perspective on, what is Eros? And then from that place, breaking it down of how or what your journey has looked like in the liberation of your own Eros.
Yeah. Well, I've been blessed to have an amazing teacher. Rabbi Mark Gaffney has made a big part of his life work is explaining what Eros is and explaining how it actually originated from the lineage of the deep wisdom of Solomon, the Kabbalist Hebrew lineage. And he tells the story about how on top of the Temple of Solomon, which was the temple in Jerusalem, the temple that the Romans destroyed and was destroyed actually twice, the final time it was destroyed so that no two stones of that temple would stand on top of one another. They just completely decimated it. And this was the act of empire, which is represented in many different archetypal forces. But of course, the Roman Empire was one of the stronger expressions of empire, and then that ultimately turned from Caesar to Pope, and this suppression of our natural kind of inclination to feel this primordial force of the cosmos. So on top of the Temple of Jerusalem, there was 2 sexually intertwisted cherubs on top. And it was the same symbol that was on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And what that represented was Eros, which was embodied by the goddess Shekinah, which is the goddess of all, which is actually a representation of this force of Eros. And it wasn't the cherubs that represented it. It was the space between the cherubs. And the space between the cherubs was Eros. It was that force of allurement, that force of intimacy that was actually drawing them closer together, and the ecstasy of that kind of allurement that comes. So, of course, when we think of the word erotic, we think of the sexual. And as Mark Gaffney has taught me, the sexual models the erotic, but it does not exhaust the erotic. So we can learn about the force of Eros through our sexual expression, but we can also find it in a bite of food. I can find it in the sip of this matcha. I can find it in this conversation. Right now, we're 2 of those cherubs, and there's Eros actually flowering, a unique erotic connection and a unique intimacy of our unique selves interacting in a unique way that's never been before, because actually we're different every single day. So every time we come together, that Eros evolves, and it actually grows from where it was and then evolves into something else. So there's an erotic charge that's in every good conversation and every interaction when you're actually fully present to what is. So, and then using the sexual to actually learn and play with this force and understand it, and understand that Eros is actually not only is our birthright, it's also one of the most healing aspects of any energy that we can access. And without access to Eros, our ethics start to fall away, because if we don't have access to Eros, we don't actually understand the goodness of our life and the universe and the world. And outside of the goodness, we've turned ourselves away from Shekinah, from this force that animates all of life. We've turned our face, and in the lineage they call that Sitra Akra, the turning of the face, which creates the upside down world. And then in the upside down world, where we're not connected, panim al panim, face to face with the divine impulse of Eros, then all kinds of different, like in Stranger Things, the upside down world is like the normal world. It still has the same buildings, but there's something actually festering and dark that's growing in the absence of it. So Eros is not only our birthright, it's also the way that keeps us in honest, integrous expression, because it brings out our natural goodness. I was musing the other day, people are like, they're all so worried about like when karma is going to happen and when justice is going to happen, but for people who do bad things. But have you ever actually seen someone act truly wickedly who was actually fully in love with themselves and fully in touch with the erotic nature of all of life? They just don't act that way. They don't act in a way that's trying to deny someone else's sovereignty. They don't act in a way that's controlling or tyrannical, or they just don't. And then the people who do act in those ways, they're suffering. They're not connected to that. They're looking away. And in the looking away, the suffering is instant. So the karma is being played out in the immediate. And sure, they may be able to access what Mark Gaffney calls pseudo-eros, which is this kind of feeling of aliveness that can come from getting drunk or doing certain types of drugs or having certain types of sex or certain types of experience that give you a quick hit, but it doesn't really ever last. It just feeds this hungry ghost.
It's like a veneer.
Yeah, it's like a way to get some false representation of what you're actually looking for. And an example of that would be, imagine that you're in a really intimate conversation with someone and there's this feeling of being on the inside, like we're in the inside of this conversation. Well, a pseudo-eros version of being on the inside would be for both of us to start talking shit about somebody else. And then we talk shit about somebody else, and that creates this artificial intimacy of us there. But it's only available because we've put somebody else on the outside. So that's not real Eros. It's actually a trick. And the trick is we've made an other that's not us. And so we're in this together because we're talking shit about somebody else. But it doesn't last. It doesn't work, because if everybody does that, then when you're out of the room, you're the one who's on the outside and someone's talking shit about you. So it actually undermines the fabric of the entire community when you actually do that. And that's Don Miguel Ruiz, one of the four agreements: be impeccable with your word. That means really be in erotic connection, be in the intimacy of that eros without having to put anybody else on the outside, because you don't need to, and it won't work, and it'll undermine the whole system. So the whole field is so rich, and when you start to understand the world in those terms, everything starts to make a lot more sense.
The way that you speak about it, it creates this neutrality as opposed to a certain charge, whether it's good or bad. It takes the binary out of what is, and it allows what is to actually be absorbed into the being, to therefore become and then share it again. And when you mentioned about there's a form of wanting to create a connection, so then putting someone outside of the experience, but that feels icky. Like every single time that ever happens, it doesn't sit right. Like on a physical level, it feels really gross and kind of greasy in my being. So that's how do you say it? Pseudo-eros.
Pseudo-eros.
Pseudo-eros. It doesn't. It's resonance. It's either in resonance or it's in dissonance. But it's like it's almost like pretending to be the original form of it. So how do you see eroticism and eros? Or how would you describe the difference between the two?
Well, eroticism is a type of eros, right? It models eros. It is, so when you're actually in an erotic connection and you're doing it in a way that actually, because you can have a sexual connection that's also pseudo-eros, where, and this is the idea of, I'm going to sleep with this person because it's going to make me feel better about myself, and all you're thinking about is your own sexual performance and the fact that you actually got somebody to surrender to your sexual allurement, right? You're not actually in the experience of that sexual relationship. And that's the antithesis of what actual eros is. That's using the sexual in a way that's pseudo-eros, right? And, it's really actually sad and kind of degrading of the psyche and of the kind of spirit when you get in those ideas. And for me, I've always had this kind of intuitive sense of that, perhaps because of my relationship with my mother and my kind of reverence for the feminine. There's been very, very few times in my life where I've ever had a lover that was just a lover for one time. And the only times that happened, it was like, yeah, this may be cool. And then in that experience, something was revealed. It was like, well, we're way out of resonance. And it was like mad blessings, but like that wasn't the thing that, we were hoping it was going to be. And I can think maybe 2 times in my whole life where that was. So, like I made a kind of a joke about it. It's like there's this idea of carving a notch in the headboard, which is the pseudo-eros idea, and men and women can have that as well. You can, be in the intoxication of your seductress, men or women, and then having a prize like, oh yeah, I slept with this person, or I did this thing. So it can go both ways, and it's this kind of notch in the headboard. It's never been interesting to me, not in the slightest. I'd rather make a groove in the floorboards because the bed keeps moving over years, and that's what's interesting to me. So even in my 8 years of polyamory, all of my paramours typically lasted, at least 6 months or a year or 3 years. One of them was like 6 years. We were in this dance together, and it wasn't always perfectly healthy in all of the different ways, but there was something that was really enlivening about those experiences. And to me, that was my craving for genuine eros rather than the pseudo-eros of just having this one moment of, genital pleasure or more likely egoic pleasure. Because if you're in a mutual agreement, like, yeah, this is going nowhere, but we have a lot of physical chemistry, and consciously we're going to go in this to actually access that pleasure, that's eros as well. It doesn't mean it has to last a long time. It just means that everything that's happening is done in full consciousness.
So as you continue to allow Eros to breathe through you in full liberation, also through Vylana, how do you see this navigating in the way of moving and shifting from polyamory into choosing your partner, your queen, full commitment towards the two of you, between the two of you, your wife, and then still allow the Eros to live and breathe, and the eroticism and the liberation of the entirety of your highest excitement, while also honoring the container?
So the key is that Eros is a technology, and we've known this in many different cultures. All of the tantra schools, which have many different roots. There's obviously the Indian lineages of it. There's actually the, Kabbalist lineages of it that Mark's actually elucidating and advancing in a really strong way. He has the 7 levels of Eros, and we're working together on a book that's going to be the phenomenology of Eros. So to bring that into modern context, there's, even, Taoist and, Chinese and all of these different cultures, typically Eastern cultures that understood this, because the West was fairly tainted by this kind of puritanical Judeo-Christian from this particular brand of particularly Catholic kind of upbringing, which is sex is bad, pleasure is bad, and it's created this blindness where you're not actually willing to really look at what you're doing because some part of you actually agrees and believes that what you're doing is bad. And there can be a kind of a naughty erotic charge that comes from that, but it's not actually giving you the full access to the fuck that's available. And I think part of the problem is that unless you are aware of the technology of Eros, you're going to find that your relationship gets stale. And if you want to look at the graphs in the aggregate of that happening, Dr. Wednesday Martin put out a book called Untrue. And in that book, she shows actually tracking the frequency and desire of sex within committed partnerships. And typically after 2 or 3 years, it starts to fall off. For men, it starts to trail off. And for women, it actually falls off a fucking cliff.
Yeah.
Right? Which is then all of this that's in the zeitgeist of men saying, I hope I get lucky tonight. And I hope that she actually lets me have sex with her. And this idea, because in the aggregate, that erotic charge falls off a cliff. And so the technology of keeping that alive is instead of, and then so with that being the case, well, what do you do? What do you do? Your erotic charge has fallen off a cliff. You're in a monogamous agreement. Yeah. What do you do? Well, unfortunately, many people, probably over half, if you look at, I don't know, it depends on the surveys that you look at, are unfaithful. They find that novelty, which the technical term for that new relationship energy, which is actually created and spurred by novelty, they find it with a different person. So that could be serial monogamy. You're with somebody for a little while, it starts to get stale, you bounce, you're with somebody else, so you just go from one period of limerence to another, chasing that actual, that charge that will make things feel really alive. And that's the workaround that people have, either infidelity, or they just continue to break up. People who've been in 6 marriages or whatever that is. And maybe that's for reasons that, I don't want to judge anybody who's had a bunch of those. My parents had multiple marriages and I get it, and I've had multiple relationships. I've had a variety of different things, but fundamentally, I think you have to learn how to create novelty at depth, not in variety. And that's the kind of technique of being in a tantric erotic relationship, is you can find the stranger in that other person if you actually pay attention, listen, go deep, uncover a different part of yourself, create a connection that goes even deeper. And this is what the 7 levels of sexing in the phenomenology of Eros is all about. It's about all right, how do we actually find even deeper depth of each other in this moment to keep novelty alive? Even though it's the same person, it's not the same person, because we're actually evoking a new quality of that same person. So the stranger, that same thing that you get on that new first date, 3rd date, 7th date with that new lover, you find that with the same person. And that's the technology that I think is necessary to really allow relationships to stay alive and charged. And it's just not what's taught. And so I don't blame people for looking for workarounds, and I don't blame the situation for relationships failing. We're not taught the technology. We're trying to actually make something work with old tech. And we got all of the fairy tales and all the stories that tell us that we should be in this constant state of passion. And then when the passion goes, there's something wrong with our partner, or there's something wrong with us, and we go to therapy and we figure it out. No, it's just that we don't have the right software. We're running the wrong software on our hardware, and the hardware is going to do what the hardware does based on this software, and it's going to actually decline. So that technology is, I think, absolutely essential. And so if I'm talking about my relationship with Vylana, that's part of the technology that we've employed to keep our charge really strong. And some of that involves power exchange dynamics, submissive and dominant relationship, entering into new spaces. And we've also expanded the container, which I think is a separate topic. But the first thing is we got that locked down. And if that's all there ever was, we're always going to have a beautiful, passionate relationship. And to let Vi know, we're good. Forever, for the rest of our life, if it's just us and all we do is continue to explore this depth and find the edges and expand the edges, we're good. We're always going to be good. And then on top of that, as this great gift, we've found the expression of bringing other lovers into our container to be also just bonus, just actually this kind of icing on a beautiful cake that we would eat every day. It's this banana bread is amazing, but wow, what if we layered some butter on it? And it'd be even better, But it's it's something that's additive, but not necessary. And that's the position I find myself in. And frankly, it's I can't imagine being in a situation that I could love more than I love right now. I love Vi so much, and I love our whole life and our whole situation so much. And I just feel really blessed.
This is the epitome of what I meant when I said that when I came into the parameters of the love between the two of you and the love that you have access through the Eros, through the eroticism, a lot of my programming, a lot of my conditioning around, even being 30 centimeters closer to somebody of the opposite sex, it was called the 30 centimeter rule. You'd get like a slap on the wrist. And that was sort of
walk to the bell tower, slut.
Quite literally. I had to go and do early morning call. It's a cool thing, literally a bell tower. And you had to go at the crack of dawn when it was freezing cold, get out of bed, walk a mile from the boarding house just to sign your name on a sheet and go back to the boarding house if you had shown signs of PDA.
Yeah.
So this is a programming around the conditioning of sensuality, sexuality, eros, and that it's not okay. If you do this, you're going to have to get up at the crack of dawn, freezing cold, and go and serve this punishment. And so then as an adult, it was, if that was alive within me while I was in partnership, monogamous partnership, I'm the worst person. How dare you? How dare you feel attraction towards somebody else? How dare my partner feel attraction towards somebody else? That's not what this is. Something must be broken. Something's not going right. But what about if the actual question is that this didn't even start at all with this partnership? In fact, the way that our society is set up and our relationship to Eros is actually distorted.
It's upside down. It's the upside down world. And, if you imagine that there is a force of empire that wants us disempowered because they want to control us, they want to keep us locked in a state of constant lack and consumerist addiction and deny access to our full power, well, close down our sexual center. I mean, you called what was between your legs, you called your pussy the Stargate, the Stargate to the cosmos. And I think being here in the queendom and being around all of these amazing pioneering goddesses who are really bringing that truth fully through. And then there's other, men on different sides, like David Data. I don't agree with everything he says, but he actually understands, for a man, how you penetrate your woman is how you penetrate the world. And so all of this energy, all of our sacred fuck, you clamp that thing down and you got a culture that's very easy to control and manipulate, because they've lost access to their power, which is the power of Shekinah, which is the power of God. which they knew back in the old days in the temples in Jerusalem. And one of the reasons why, the Jews were constantly being attacked, why the Romans were continually, in conflict with the Jewish Hebrew people, was because they wouldn't bend the knee to the empire and the emperor, because they were connected to Shekinah. They were connected to that. So you have the Lions of Judah and the Maccabees and these just warrior poets. And we don't think about that when we think of Jewish culture. But because they were just completely smashed by empire, they didn't have the numbers. And they didn't organize themselves to war. They weren't like the Spartans, who were like a warlike culture, but they stood for something. They stood for value, and they were just decimated. And why would you take every stone of a temple and make sure that no two stones were actually standing on top of another one unless you wanted to destroy the lineage entirely? So the temple had to go underground. It had to be written about in allegory, and it had to be mentioned in ways because they were burning all of the ancient texts. Why are the Dead Sea Scrolls important? The Dead Sea Scrolls are important because they were one of the only texts that the Romans didn't burn, that were actually written by the Hebrew lineage. And they depict a far different thing than what was actually decided to be written about in the Council of Nicaea in the Bible. It's a much different story. It was a story of conflict against this force of empire, which was trying to degrade the inherent value that these people felt. And it wasn't just the Jews. They were simultaneously, as the emperors were going to destroy Jerusalem, they were also up there in the north trying to wipe out the Druids. Why? Because the Druids were connected to the Eros of all of the forest, that life force energy, those rituals, those sexually infused rituals that would emerge and give them great power. The Merlin, which was like the head of the Wizard of the Druids, right? Like these ideas were real. They existed, but they were destroyed. And then when they reemerged in different times, then that's when the witch burning started. Mm-hmm. That's when all of these crusades would start. Every time that people have tried to get back in touch with their power, this force of empire, which tries to control, is going to attack. Mm-hmm. And now we're in a different type of game. Now you can't actually... you can in some cases, but you can't actually wage kinetic war on these people. Genocide is frowned upon, thank God, in our world now. So now it's fifth generational warfare. And fifth generational warfare is a war of ideas. So this is where the canceling comes into play. This is where you try to slander somebody, keep them from actually sharing their voice and attack their character, all of these different ways. Mm-hmm. But the beauty of fifth generational warfare, however vicious it might be and however entrenched and strong the forces of empire are in their collusion, which we saw exposed in the Twitter files, collusion between the FBI and the government and Twitter to suppress certain voices, that exists. But nonetheless, there's still a place at the table for these ancient wisdom lineages that have evolved and are evolving, and new lineages that are emerging of people who stand for value. Like there's a place at the table. So now empire can't just wipe them out and erase the memory. They can do it a little bit, but this is what's exciting about the time that we're in, is because we have a voice, and that voice is not going to be easily silenced. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we showed up and chose to be in this life at this time, in this incarnation, because it's like, all right, like now it's a different game, and it's not about who has the biggest guns. Empire's got that. And if anybody thinks that we're going to win anything because we have a bunch of firearms, like, no, empire always has more firearms. That's not the way to do it. The way is to actually share everything we have. And anybody who's in that empire consciousness, first, locate the empire consciousness within yourself. Mm-hmm. Locate the desire to disempower others, the desire to control others, the desire to be on the very top of the pyramid. Find that within yourself. And that's what creates the invitation to invite people to defect from that mindset of fear and scarcity and their inability to access Eros. It's like, I see that in myself, and I recognize that in you, brother or sister, and there's a seat at the table for you. And come on, it's way more fun on this side, I promise. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is going to change the world.
Mm-hmm. That kind of trickles into the way that I see that you celebrate the women around you, and the way that you from my personal experience, have given me a platform, a voice. You've shared my voice on your platforms multiple times. You've highlighted me, and I've witnessed you do this to the other women around you, is the genuine desire to want to see the women around you thrive and to tap into their oracle, their wisdom keeper, their sage. And you have done whatever it is that you can within your power and whatever you've unlocked within your own psyche to support the women around you to really unlock that. How do you feel like this specific piece is imperative to the direction we're moving in as a humanity?
I think that unfortunately we have a history that was riddled with a kind of subtle and sometimes overt misogyny. And, this is the patriarchy that people are talking about, right? Like there was a subtle force that was suppressing this innate wisdom, because I think there were men who didn't have the courage to actually, stand in their own power and welcome that. That dark feminine was too scary. The power that was held within a woman was too scary. So let's make them hide it in every way possible. Make them wear clothes where you can't even see their body, or you can't even see any aspect because you can't deal with it, or run from it, even if it wasn't a suppression necessarily in that way. There's monastic cultures where I remember I went to Thailand, and again, all respect for all the paths. I'm not trying to be judgmental of the paths, but I do invite those paths to evolve. I saw monks in saffron robes, and I was there with Caitlin at the time, and I was donating some money, and they were giving me a little token of a little Buddha carved in sandstone, and she went to go give the money, and they couldn't even touch her. They couldn't even exchange through their hand. I had to do it for them, and I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense to me. Or in other traditions, and again, mad respect for these monastic cultures and their traditions. I think they're doing something powerful. I just fundamentally don't agree with that mindset. I think it's all based on some belief that this is somehow going to taint your presence or going to distract you, whatever it might be. And in another example of that, you go into an inipi, a sweat lodge, and a woman is on her moon and she has to sit out and can't be a part of it. Or a woman is on her moon, and my sister Waira, who's become a dear, dear sister, she talked about she was in a ayahuasca ceremony, and the shaman she was working, the taita she was working with at the time, asked is anybody on her moon? And one of the newer women was like, yes, I started my moon. And she's like, after they took the medicine, and then made her go sit in the car in the parking lot instead of being in the Maloka, right? So there's these ideas, and this is the lineage. This is the lineage. And the belief is that if she was there and she was actually, on her moon, people would get sick and the energy would, but it's not fucking true. So Waira ended up having to go into the car with her and sing Ikaros in the car, so that they could go through this 5-hour ceremony, right? So I don't fundamentally agree with that. And there's, there's interesting examples we have another medicine sister who's with a partner in his tabaquero lineage, the idea that you can't be around, again, a woman on her moon. Why people have been so obsessed with women on their moon is it's a big deal. I get it. But there's all of this kind of male fear around it. And in his lineage teaching, if he was around anybody with a moon, he would get sick, right? So actually, psychosomatically, he manifested that. And when his partner was on her moon, she had to stay far away. So her being the badass medicine woman that she is, she lied about it one time. It was like, yeah, I'm on my moon. He's like, yeah, I know, I got the worst headache. Oh man, I got the worst headache. And so she let him go a whole day thinking that she was on her moon and just moaning about the headache. And she's like, I'm not going to leave the house today. He's like, oh my God. And he's in his bed oh, I'm so... And then at the end of the night, she goes, hey, I'm not on my moon. I was just joking. And he's like, oh. And then he realized it was all in his head, all that belief, right? So I mention this just to say that this is not something that's not there in the First Nations, indigenous lineage. It's around in many, many places. And of course, there's been goddess lineages and those old traditions where actually the goddess was always revered and always worshipped. And so these are just some examples, but it's been universal that there's this subtle fear and there's these subtle judgments about the natural processes of a woman that have existed. And then also ways in which some of the most powerful experiences a woman can have, like birth, have been sterilized, medicalized. You know, you can't feel anything below your legs. Instead of squatting, you're lying in a bed. And then the first thing that happens is bright lights and then injection with fucking vaccines and shit they put in their eyes and this crazy medicalized thing instead of this unbelievably sacred and powerful moment, which I'm not saying that hospital births can't be sacred and powerful, of course, but we're missing like some of these primal aspects of feminine energy that range from sexuality to presence during the cycles and connections to the moon. I mean, how fucking cool that a woman's body actually correlates to the same amount of time that the cycle of the moon is, right? It's amazing.
It's remarkable.
It's amazing. It's incredible. And that should be celebrated in a way. And I think that's part of this reclamation of the feminine. So with that, knowing that there's a subtle denigration and a subtle suppression of the woman's voice, there's an appropriate response to elevate that. And I think what happens is sometimes men get a little flustered by that because, to be honest, men's actual, true, authentic voices have also been suppressed, right? Empire suppresses universally. However, there's certain threads of the suppression of the feminine which have been a little bit more universal. Same with suppression of voices of Indigenous First Nations people, same with people of color. Lots of people have suffered in many ways more at the hands of this kind of general zeitgeist. You know, of course, exceptions with all of that. So helping to elevate those voices, I think, is crucial and helps bring about balance. And also simultaneously supporting all men, because that's also necessary, right? Like everybody needs to evolve. So it's not that you just focus on one side and that's what's going to make the world right. Like, I don't like when people say the future is feminine.
Or female.
The future is female.
It's integrated.
It's integrated.
The future is integrated.
It's both.
It's got to be.
It's got to be both.
It's the as above, so below, or the triangles that kind of like overlock or intersect. And when they actually do, I saw it. Robert Edward Grant had created a drawing of the integrated masculine and the integrated feminine, and when they actually overlock, it creates a yoni. And that yoni is then essentially the representation of the portable creation. But the creation is only formed from the balance of the masculine and the feminine. Within us as individuals, recognizing we have the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, the left and right lobes, the masculine and feminine. And then also within the way that we relate to others or the world at large. But the future can only be integrated if we actually want to see a new paradigm.
Yeah.
There has to be a balance.
No doubt. No doubt.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that you're highlighting where there is a lack of balance or where the balance isn't fully in equilibrium, and the necessary attention, intention placed on the area where the balance is off so that actually full restoration of equality can be born.
Amen. I mean, I'm wearing on my necklace, I'm wearing the Star of David. And if anybody read the Da Vinci Code, right, you understand that this is the masculine triangle, which pointed up, and the feminine triangle interlocked, the 6-pointed star. And the 6-pointed star was replaced by the 5-pointed star, missing one of the points. And of course, what is the 5-pointed star most associated with? Well, it's either some emoji that represents, you're a star. Well, all right, you're a star. That's a very kind of egoic expression of being a star. If the point's facing up, that means it's the masculine point that's actually highlighted in this particular way. And there's a kind of egoic context to it of the 5-pointed star. You're a star. All right. And then, again, this is getting mythopoetic, but then you invert it and the star is down, right? And the point is facing down of the 5-pointed star. And then that's a sign of Satanism, right? That's the pentagram. That's evil. Either way, it's not exactly quite right because it's missing the balance of if the masculine and feminine are 3 points, one way you invert it. And an unbalanced shadow aspect of the feminine were these pagan rituals, the human sacrifices to the god Baal, and these kind of dark elements of paganism. Like we often cast like all paganism was good and all, earth-based traditions were good. No. There was human sacrifice. Children were being killed. Like it wasn't all good. Not all good anywhere you look, really. So it's like, can we restore the sixth point to the star? Which any way you move it, there's balance. You can rotate that thing in any different direction. And that's a part of what we're doing. We're moving from the 5-pointed star, which is either, egotism or some aspect of connection to that dark primordial urge to actually access the darkest part of our energy. Instead, it's a 6-pointed star, which any way you rotate it, there's balance. And so to me, maybe if you read the books or things, you're not going to find this description of the 5 or 6-pointed star, but it came to me as kind of a poetic symbol of what we're doing. We're here to restore the 6th point. We're here to restore the balance.
And you have it partnered next to your sword of discernment, would be my guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because what am I fighting for? What am I fighting for if not that? If not balance? I don't want a world that's all good, and I don't want a world that's all bad. I don't want a world that's all masculine. I don't want a world that's all feminine. I want balance. That's what I want. I want to allow this thing to really flourish. And so that's what my sword stands for.
Thank you so much for weaving into the depths and the intricacies of the fabric of your own consciousness, of making peace with the aspects that you have been shown on your journeys, in your altered states of consciousness, bringing the unconditional love that has been nurtured to you from your mother in the way that you navigate the world of always being a stand for integrity, balance, genuine healing, calling individuals in and recognizing that the only way that we're going to heal all aspects of ourselves is to actually learn to love the non-binary experience beyond good and bad, but actually the most sacred thing is what is, and you do it so beautifully. And I have been able to receive so many blessings just from you living your life. Not you doing anything for Blue. It's just me being able to be close in your parameter to witness the way that you make your choices, whether it's sitting down at lunch and you have a conversation with somebody and I'm just getting to listen. It creates just a shift of 1 degree of the way that I perceive how I would navigate certain situations that are similar moving forward. But 1 degree shift, you follow that out for 20 years, all of a sudden you have like a very different human. And that is what you've done for me, is that you being you and liberating your Eros, liberating your truth, and also keeping the genius of your child alive, which can be found in the way that you laugh through life. That is just so relatable to me because of the places and the depths in which you go, and also the way that you laugh is all-encompassing in a level of genius that I think can only be accessed when you're in a child survived. Yeah. And I also wanted to tell you, I told Matthias that I would tell you on the podcast. I spoke to Matthias De Stefano last night and asked him how he's doing with his recovery. And he shared with me that he was asked a question of who in his life is a reference point for successful individuals that have responsibility or big responsibilities in life that have stayed connected to their childlike awe and wonder and play. And he said that his answer was you, me, and Vylana.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I know.
That's beautiful.
When I got that text message, I did like a little happy dance.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I asked permission if I could share it with you. And he was like, yeah, of course. And I was like, wait, no, I'm going to tell him on the podcast tomorrow so that you can actually just receive how it was delivered and received, because that is the place that actually I have just the most... my nervous system really settles in your presence is when you're playing. Yeah. It's when
I'm really home.
This is it. But it's in the in-between moments. It's when you're doing the dishes or you're having a conversation at breakfast, or just the way that you choose to weave in the world with the depth and the philosophies and the very complex technologies that you have dove into head first. You've also kept kept the rattle of the child just like shaking in the background. That is the fabric of the why behind all of it.
Yeah. I truly believe that you can tell a spiritual master by the sound of their laughter.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Like, when they really laugh. That's what initially drew me to the work of Muji Baba, who's an amazing kind of Buddhist teacher, but they call him the laughing Buddha because he just gets in these states. Someone's in a satsang and they're going through some very difficult problem, and then he just starts laughing, and then they start laughing, and then the laughing becomes contagious. And I was like, this guy fucking gets it. And that laughter can alchemize any situation. Like, I remember, and I know we're in the wrap-up period here, but just to kind of expand on that point because it's important. I remember one of the craziest medicine journeys I was ever on was a group of 12 men, and it was one of those super, triple, double blood pink moons. I don't know, one of those special ones that happen. I'm not
where
really,
everything will change.
It's like the super blood pink wolf, the diamond moon or whatever. And we did some mushrooms that night, and the mushrooms were the penis envy strain of mushrooms, and we were a little bit unfamiliar with how strong those are comparative to like a golden teacher or something like that. Like,
yes, there are mushrooms out there called penis envy, by the way.
Yeah. And be mindful. This is a heads up. Like, if you see penis envy and you're used to dosing your mushrooms accordingly to like what you're normally used to, like what's in mushroom bars, penis envy hits different. I mean, it's very, very intense. So anyways, we go into this, and very quickly there was at least 4 out of the 12 of us, maybe 5, that were going into a psychotic break, like full psychotic break. And everybody was so blasted that nobody could really help. Even though we had some medicine people, that everybody was like, we were deep in it.
Oh, snap.
And then one of the people who was in the psychotic break, so before we go in, we're like talking and sharing our heart, and it was this kind of it was a men's group, it was a men's weekend, men's work. So we're sharing our heart, and one of the brothers shared that, he just had an abortion with his girlfriend, and it was heavy, it was like a heavy thing to share. And we're like, and in the middle of the thickest part of the journey, the guy who was having like a full kind of psychotic break was in a loop, was like, hey, didn't you say you just had an abortion? And it was the most ridiculous, outrageous thing to bring up at that point. And then like some of us just started laughing. And then the laughing became contagious. And actually, that was the perfect thing that could have been said, because the guy was like, yeah, man, I did. I shared that. And it was so outrageous. Then all of a sudden, I'm grappling with this devil figure that looked like a master puppeteer. And I was like, it was like fractal devil. And I'm like, fuck, this is intense. And then as soon as I started laughing, there was this feeling like, oh, we're going to make it out of here. Like, we're going to make it out of here. It's all going to be all right. So from there, that point of the night, it was the most hilarious night. And it was hilarious. I was like purging. I'd go from purging to crying to laughing, and everybody started laughing, even the people who were having their psychotic break. Eventually, the laughter got contagious, and we navigated our way out of there just because we started laughing. And it was just a great reminder that in those darkest situations, like if you can find laughter, it'll just alchemize everything. So that was that's the story. But laughter it's so much a part of my life, and it's really an orgasm with different spasms.
100%. It's the rocket fuel for manifestation.
That's it.
It's like swimming in the deepest, craziest waters, but then someone's like, I got a buoy! Yeah. And it's laughter, just like, grab hold, otherwise you're going to die. Take it!
That was it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. A good reminder, for all of those Vision Quest explorers that are continuing on the journey of self-discovery and going into the depth of not only our own individual trauma and what we've processed within our lives, and then on top of that, past life experiences, but then there's also the memory of our mother and our mother's mother and our father and our father's father and the whole lineage that we're going, I have decided that I will be the one that feels it all so that I don't pass it on to my future generation. If we ain't laughing, God help us.
Yeah, no doubt.
Quite the experience.
No doubt.
Aubrey, thank you so much for
I love you, Blue.
Offering your
I really love you.
Oh, I really love you too. And I was in the sauna this morning with Emily, and she said, "What is the thing that you're most looking forward to for your podcast with Aubrey?" And it was just to be able to have an hour and a half of uninterrupted time with you to just chat. Because even in the spaces that we're together, whether it's at Fit for Service or we're in group containers, like there's always so much going on. And we find these little pockets where everyone's gone to bed and we're getting our night drink. And I'm like, hey, Obs, and give you a hug. But to actually just have an hour and a half of just being like, hey, good to see you again.
Yeah.
And there just so happens to be cameras here. That was the thing that I was most looking forward to. So I'm just so grateful.
No.
Yeah.
Absolute pleasure.
And you get to come to the Queenum and feel what we're creating here. It's pretty cool.
It's amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
Those amazing women that are celebrating and supporting each other and creating incredible things and doing it in a way that it's just laced with the utmost fun celebration.
Let's go.
Living la vida loca.
Thanks, everybody. We love you.
Thank you, Aubrey.
Thanks, bud.
Alrighty, beautiful humans. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Deja Blu Podcast. If you resonated with today's episode, then please go ahead and share it on your Instagram stories because we can reach so many more people when you share it on your own individual platforms. So my prayer and my hope is that you received some wisdom and some insights and activation and empowerment and illumination into different areas of perceiving the world that actually empowers you as your own sovereignty and your own Eros and our own liberation of your heart to soar free. So sending you so much love, and until next week, thank you for tuning in.